Hi, my name's Sean Daniel. I'm the founder of Better Days Rain, and today we have a very special guest in the studio. It's my dad, Greg Daniel, and part two of Better Days Rain vision statement is family togetherness, and that is a big mission for Better Days Rain is to help bridge the gap of understanding between family members and people still suffering from addiction. There's a lot of things we don't understand. There's a lot of things we don't get. And so who better to bring in the man who's had to deal with it his whole life? You know, tell me, hey, say hi to the camera.
What's going on out there, recovery world?
So, what is it like having let's go back to when I was a kid.
Okay.
What is it like having a kid that is on drugs? Like, what was it? Tell us a little bit about the experience, how you felt, and where you saw things going.
Well, the first part of your question, what I saw and how that made me feel. Honestly, it was shocking. It was scary because it involved things that I hadn't been exposed to. And I think just like most parents, you want your kids to turn out a certain way. Whether it be, to go to college and get a degree and go get a nice paying job for yourself and have a family and support yourself, or whether it just be a trade school, a blue collar job where you get a certificate and you go to work, maybe being an entrepreneur and having your own business someday. You have dreams for your children, and whether they come true or not, isn't really for the parent to decide. It's for the child, for the individual to decide on their own. And so, how that made me feel, I was shocked, and just shock and awe. Really, it was because in those times, I didn't realize the role that I played in those things that you were doing. Okay, and um, I didn't necessarily feel like a victim, um, but I felt like somehow I have got to get my son to a better place. I have to. I felt at the time, honestly, that maybe moving would help. Uh, Putting you in a different environment where you would be around other people with a fresh start, kind of a thing. And I was hoping that maybe that would take. Maybe it was just a crowd you were hanging out with at the time. Um, I was trying to think about it logically, and um, because you were, the anger level that you had for me in those days was so high that you weren't willing to give up anything to me. You weren't going to tell me anything that I needed to know about what was going on in your mind. That door was closed and it was going to stay shut because you had your reasons. And but it still left me fishing for wanting answers, wanting to know what has happened that's caused you to want to do this. Um, and I come from a generation where, sure, addiction happens, codependency happens, anger happens, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, gambling. I mean, this goes back eons. But um, I think it was the respect level, because I didn't do a very good job of respecting you and your space, and you certainly weren't going to show me any respect in my space. And so there was this great disconnect between the two of us. And that disconnect, when the communication shut down, there was no more information. There was nothing that there was nothing that I could learn from what was currently happening in that moment. All I was trying to do was trying to facilitate a change that would improve your situation. And the first thing that came to my mind was for us to maybe move and surround you with better people, new people, that kind of thing. Not really fully understanding how far into addiction you were at that point. because you weren't showing me anything. You know, we had some brushes with the law, you know, and of course I was faced with some of that along with you, you know, court appearances and things. But I still didn't understand where your mind was because you weren't giving up any information. So it made me feel as a failure as a dad. To be honest with you, it did. I just felt like, you know, you only get one chance at being a parent. You know, uh, the way that you hope that you would be as a parent, and when you see it just crumbling before your eyes, it's heartbreaking. It was heart wrenching to see your young life start the way that it did.
So I guess me going back to that time and looking back to it like through my middle school, high school, um, you know, so growing up, my parents, I don't ever remember my parents. So I've always been in a single parent home, so to speak. And my dad's always been an insanely hard worker. And I can remember that time, you don't think he was. And like he would work from sun up to sundown. There was, to provide. And I spent a lot of time in the probably more than I should have. And I think where a lot of that came into play was that disconnection between us. And then the time that we were together, right? It was always negative
Yeah.
because it was always a time of discipline. It was always a time of, kind of turmoil because that was the only time we had to really um, check up, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like check in and check up type deal, you know?
Right.
So it was always, okay, what are we doing and where are we going? And we could just never meet on common ground. And I think a lot of that was just because like we didn't spend a whole lot of time but we couldn't, you had to provide for the family,
Right.
and I was just doing my thing. But so I think a lot of that confusion, a lot of that anger, a lot of those resentments came from that disconnection.
Yeah.
And then of course as I got older, that disconnection grew and grew and grew. I started getting into more brushes with the law. I took off on the road for a year, which was absolutely a horrible idea, but nevertheless, a lesson learned. But let me ask you, fast forwarding 25 years, do you think you would have ever saw God's plan 25 years ago?
No.
Like, would you ever imagine sitting right here, us chopping it up, reconciling
No.
in the way that we have, the relationship we have today,
No.
and the vision of where things are going through that 25 years of destruction and I guess where I'm going with this is we put limits on our faith. We tend to say we have faith, but we have very little faith in the future because it's that fear that we don't know what's going to happen. Right. So yeah, let me ask you, where does God's plan and Greg's plan fall in line?
Right. Well, I think first of all, I want to preface my answer by saying that while all this was going on, little did I know that I was struggling with my own character defects, which are anger and codependency. And they manifest themselves during that time even more so, especially the anger. I was angry at you. I was angry for what I felt like you were doing to me. I was angry because of what I felt you were doing to the family, and I was angry at you because of what you were doing to yourself and your own future. I remember us sitting in a therapist's office one day, and he knows where I'm going with this. We're sitting in a therapist's office one day where his stepmother, myself, and Sean were at this meeting along with a therapist, and to figure out, what's going on and where do we go from here. And Sean just looked at all three of us and he said, at the ripe age of 15 years old, he said, "These are my golden years. I'm going to live it up while I can because I'm going to have to work my ass off later on in life." And it just shook me to the core to hear you say that, because you're only 15. You haven't, man, buckle up, man. Life hadn't even begun to start on you yet. So now, all that being said, I was struggling with anger and codependency. And at that time, I was really starting to get angry. And I think really what it comes down to, when you look at the 25 years that you mentioned, it comes down to control. Okay. Um, it, it, I think recovery and addiction has a lot to do, my experience in recovery has a lot to do with control. It has the idea that, my idea that I need control, not just of myself, but I need control of others too. I need to, and it's all drawn out of fear. Okay. It's drawn out of fear, losing control. So the opposite of losing control is gaining control. So by trying to control situations, by trying to control the people around me to get desired outcomes, what I'm not doing is I'm not trusting God in all things. So when you say God's plan, you know, I know now that God's plan for me is to trust Him in all things. That includes with my children, with myself, with all my family members, with everything that I hold important in my life, my job, my home, everything. And I wasn't willing to do that at that time. I kept feeling like I had to do more. You know, if I could just bust his tail harder one more time, maybe he'll understand. And it was never about that. I was never going to get the desired outcome by doing those things. I was way too hard on you, as I should have been, as I was. And I look back and go, what could I have done differently? Well, I know for a fact I could have prayed about it more and I could have given it to God more. And I probably could have reached out more to other people for resources to help me understand what's really going on with you, and try to come at you with an approach that you would have maybe cracked the door and let me peek inside your world for just a little bit, you know, and maybe that would have helped back then. Today, seeing what's going on in your life with your, 4 years of sobriety and the things that you're doing now in your life, I would have, honestly, Sean, I thought that you were either going to wind up in prison the rest of your life or you were going to wind up dead. And it killed me. And I had to be somehow okay with that, knowing that it's going to be one of those two outcomes. It's because I didn't trust God. I didn't trust your ability to step outside of your comfort zone and get the help that you needed, whatever that looked like for you, because recovery is different for everybody. But the process is the same for each character defect, but the pathway is different. Right. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. You have to admit that something's not right in your life. You have to be able to admit that you're broken. Doesn't matter whose fault it is. Right. Your fault, somebody else's fault. We all have hurts, habits, and hang-ups. And we all do. Every one of us does. They say there's two kinds of people in this world: those that are in recovery and those that need recovery.
That's the truth.
And so no matter how clean living that you have, no matter how great you think things are, everybody's been hurt by someone else in this world, and we've all hurt someone else. Yeah. And just understanding that basic fundamental right there, at least it gives you a viewpoint, a starting point to say, okay, I know something's not right with me. What do I need to do to find the help that I need? Because if my program was working, then I wouldn't be where I'm at. I wouldn't be angry. I wouldn't be codependent. I wouldn't be an alcoholic. I wouldn't be, a drug user. I wouldn't, be a gambler. I wouldn't, there's all these different types of character defects and addictions out there. And they all play out as a symptom of a deeper problem. Okay. What does that deeper problem look like? And for me, most people don't want to look at their deeper problem. It can be real hurtful. It can be painful. And it's easier to shove it down and pretend like it never happened and continue living my life like I am.
Right.
even though I don't have truthfully in my own heart, I don't have the life I wish I had. I wish I had the life like my buddy John over here as an example. John's got a great life. I wish I had John's life, but I don't. I have my life. So I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because I'm comfortable in it, because I know what to expect from day to day to day. And it doesn't require a lot of effort on my part to change any of that. I can just keep doing what I'm doing. Even though I don't like it, I do what I do, but I don't like it. So by trusting in God, in the recovery circles that I'm in, I have seen people that have come in just like I did 4 years ago, with my head down, tail between my legs, no hope, no hope. I've failed as a husband, I've failed as a father. Can't hang my hat on anything. And I got involved with a group that said, you know what? The hardest thing that you did was to walk in that door for the first time. And they encouraged me to keep coming back. So I would tell any of your listeners out there to just take a minute and think about, is there a group that I could go see? Not that they're going to try to change me or anything, but just go here and see what changed in their lives. How were they able to do it? Because I know that where you came from and where you're at right now is night and day. And I just can't help but feel like if you could do it, anybody can do it. And that gives me hope for everyone. That gives me hope for everyone. Is it hard? Heck yeah, it's hard. It's very hard.
Absolutely.
But is it worth it? 1,000 times over, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. And we were talking about, trusting God and comfort zones. Those two play hand in hand, because you have to put your trust. I have an understanding that God works through us. He works through people. That's my understanding of God.
Right.
And so I have to put my trust in people. And that's something I'm not used to. In 25 years of addiction, like, I couldn't trust anybody out in the streets, because everybody was out to get me. Everybody was out to get what I had. You know what I mean? Or it was vice versa. I was out to get them. You know what I mean? So coming into the rooms, that second step was tough. I mean, I think that's a pretty much basic second step for just about any program of recovery is trust, putting in trust in a power higher than yourself. Right. And like I said, with the understanding that God works through people, that means I have to trust you to help me. Right. You know what I mean? Like, I have to first I have to come in and say, I'm the problem. Step 2 is I have to become teachable. And 3 is I have to learn how to trust people. And those are very difficult. And I think the reason it was so difficult for me, particularly, was because of judgment. I think the way we've thought as a human race for the last 2,000 years is totally corrupt. We use judgment as we use acceptance as a punitive consequence, as accountability. And I don't think, in my personal opinion, I don't think God intended it that way. I think God intended it to be used as a healing aspect. You know what I mean? We're not here to punish each other. We're here to help each other. And if we look at what works in recovery, it's the support system. Right. It doesn't matter what program of recovery you're in. It's the support that you get in that program with that group is why you stay in that group.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so mutuality, I think, plays a huge part in your recovery. You have to find a recovery, not just a program, but an actual group of people that you can relate to. Because 25 years, you couldn't get through to me. It was like hitting a brick wall every time, but a good friend of mine did it very simply. And it still kind of blows my mind when I think about it, how simple she did it. But I don't think anybody else could have. Like, I don't think there's any other person on this planet that could have came in at that particular moment in time and said, Sean, get sober. I'm gonna help you do it. There's something to say about that mutuality, that lived experience, that, when people come from where we come from, and not necessarily day-to-day life, but just in general terms, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like when when people talk about drug addiction, it's something to say when somebody else has a drug addiction. Somebody say for angry people helping angry people, alcoholics helping alcoholics, sex addicts helping sex addicts. You know what I mean? There's something there that creates an understanding. It creates a bond, a reconnection to where that person doesn't feel so alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they say, okay, well, and that's when that spark triggers. It says, if they can do it, I can do it.
Right. Exactly.
Because you're coming where I come from.
Yeah.
But it all starts with trusting in God and getting out of that comfort zone.
Right.
And the way you get out of that comfort zone, put your trust in Him that He's going to take care of you. And then you get to start your whole self-discovery thing. And once you start discovering that self-discovery, you hit the switch. I like to call it unlocked potential.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because limitless potential. Because where I was 4 years ago and where I am today blows my mind. You know what I mean? Like there's times I wake up in the morning and I'm like,
right.
Really?
Yeah.
Like I never envisioned this for myself.
Right.
And
one of the things I was going to mention, if I could, is the surrender.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so anyone that has experienced lasting sobriety went through a moment of surrender. We all have them. And I'm not going to go into details about mine, but I can just tell you how it made me feel. I felt like I was at the end of myself because I think I really realized I had no control. Not only do I have no control over the people around me, I don't even have control of myself anymore. I am out of control.
Yeah.
Okay. And when I realized that I was at the end of myself, I was staring a dead end road in the face with no place to go. I'd exhausted every thing that I knew how to get out of it or to work around it or any of that. I prayed a prayer to God, and in earnest, I prayed. I said, Lord, please save me from myself. And I started really realizing that I was my worst enemy. It was me. It was me. It wasn't anybody else. I can talk about how I can talk about the underlying factors of my anger and my codependency from my childhood. Those were the seeds that were planted that manifested itself into who I am today.
Right.
But the people that affected me when I was young, they're past and gone now. They're not even a part of my daily life anymore. So it's given me a lot of time to reflect on what happened in those moments and how I got the bad decisions that I made that got me to where I was. And I said, God, please save me from myself, because I all of a sudden, it's like a moment of clarity. I realized I am doing this to myself. And nobody's doing this to me anymore. I am doing this to myself. Yes, it may have gotten started with someone else in the past, but it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like I decided to stay that course. And the harder I hit that wall, I feel like if I hit the wall harder the next time, I would break through. The next time I hit it even harder, I'd break through. And all it was a loss of control and disappointment after disappointment, failure after failure, which spiraled me down even more. It's like the proverbial rabbit hole. Mm-hmm. Once I surrendered and I prayed that prayer, within 2 or 3 days, I started feeling a weight being lifted off of me that I can't explain. I'm not saying everything was better and changed overnight. That wasn't the case, but it's like, okay, I wasn't staring a dead end anymore. No, it's like it opened up and I had some options. Okay, now what? Now what are you going to do? Now because it's all mindset, right? Trapped in your own mind. I was trapped in my own mind, and I'm sure a lot of people out there may feel the same way. You're trapped in your own mind and your own. They call it stinking thinking.
Oh yeah.
You get caught up in your own stinking thinking and negative self-talk and those kind of things. And those things just hold you down and hold you back. The evil one just whispering those things in your ear so often that you become you believe it. It becomes who you are, And so, but by surrounding myself with healthy people that had my best interest at heart, that I knew, like you said, put your trust in. You can't put your trust in just anyone, as much as we would like to. but trust that God would bring good people into my life and it would help me because, to your point, He does put people in our pathway that helps us. God doesn't just touch you with a magic finger and it's all better. That's not how it works. He uses us to help each other out. And once that started taking root, I started feeling a whole lot better. You know, my prayer life improved, my home life improved. Um, and now over time, I'm in a better place. And coincidentally, you're in a better place. So now we can have a relationship again,
So,
which I never thought this was going to be possible.
me either, to be honest.
I didn't.
You know, and we're talking about God putting people in your life. I want to talk real quick about conditional relationships and unconditional relationships. Because I know from being on the streets, just about every friendship, attachment, situation, environment I was in was very conditional. It was conditional on, you know, how people viewed me, what I was doing, if I would put money on the table. You know what I mean? Today's friends are tomorrow's enemies type deal. You know, what is your take as far as conditional relationships versus unconditional relationships? Because I feel like relationships are very damaging for an addict. Um, we try to attach ourselves to people, places, and things that make us feel better. We're looking for that instant gratification, that instant relief, and we find that through negative outlets when healthy outlets aren't available, right? So I'm guessing one of those healthy outlets are those unconditional relationships, those people who are genuinely there just for you, like you said. You know, um, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it starts with expectation. You know, when, going back to our relationship as an example, um, my expectations of you were way too high for where you were at. And because you couldn't ever meet those expectations, you and I were always going to stay in a disconnected state. I wasn't able to share with you unconditional agape love, so to speak. Okay. I loved you. I've always loved you as my son.
Oh, no doubt.
Uh, but I hated the things that you were doing, the things that you were doing to yourself. That's what I hated. And I think that if society as a whole would just dial back the expectation level, because nobody knows how lost someone is. You know, it's a cover of a book. That's all you see. You don't know what's in the pages. Okay, so one thing I've learned as a team member in the recovery group that I belong to, you know, after 4 years, people ask me, "Well, Greg, you've come a long way, man. You know, you're about to take your 4-year chip in April. Why do you keep coming back?" And I tell them because I don't want to miss the miracle. I don't want to see. I don't want to miss the next Sean walking in that door. The world has just beat him to a pulp, and he's tired. He's got that 1,000-yard stare, and he's sick and he's tired, and he just needs um, not a handout, but a hand up. He needs someone to put their arm around him and say, "Hey, can I walk beside you?" And I think that makes all the difference in the world instead of just casting judgment off on somebody on how they look or how they speak or what their intellectual level might be. You know, it's just saying this person is hurting and what can I do in this moment to make this a better day for that person?
Yeah, it was something I talk about quite a lot. Like when we make assumptions out of judgment, then we miss every opportunity. Every time we act out of judgment, is every chance we miss to be a blessing in someone's life.
Amen. I agree with that
You
100%.
know,
100%. I
and,
do.
and people have to really start recognizing that
Yeah.
because recovery is not just about drug addiction. I mean, if I'm coming into the rooms of recovery and I'm saying that I am the problem, then on a social level, we have to go out in the world and say we are the problem.
Right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it all boils back down to acceptance. That's step one.
Right.
The same things they want us to do in recovery, we are so unwilling to do
Yeah.
as a community,
Right.
which makes it really hard for people in recovery because we learn these things and then we go back out into the world where what we've learned in the room doesn't apply.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because we run right back into those same walls.
Well, and society throws it on the addict. It's like, judgment as an example. You know, uh, there are recovery groups that help people that suffer from judgment.
Right.
Judgment in and of itself is a character defect and should be addressed. So when someone thinks that their side of the street is pristine and your side of the street is a dumpster fire, they need help because they're not looking they're not looking at themselves the way they're looking at you, and they should.
Right.
And they should. None of us are perfect. Ain't none of us getting out of here alive. You know,
Right.
and at the end of the day, why not help somebody else? If you're in a spot where you have the ability to put a smile on someone's face or give somebody a glimmer of hope or an arm around somebody or something as small as giving somebody a ride somewhere, from point A to point B. I've got a guy in my recovery group who's been confined to a wheelchair his whole life. And we meet on Wednesday nights, and every Wednesday night, I give him a ride home. I give him a ride home. His dad could give him a ride, but his dad's got glaucoma and doesn't drive well at night. So he said, "Hey, would you mind giving me a ride home?" And it started once, then twice, and now it's just automatic. I take him at home every Wednesday night. And it's just what I can do. And he and I don't even have the same issues.
Right.
We don't even suffer from the same things, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't mean I can't be a good human being to him. It doesn't mean I can't try to help him in some way. And I'm like that with everybody in my group. If anybody were to call me and need something, we've attended funerals for people that have passed away from our group or spouses of people that are in our group. We show up at funerals. We've had 4 baptisms come out of our group, which I attended those. That was pretty cool. So you just don't know when it comes to service. You just don't know where and how invaluable a moment of your time can be in an addict's life to help get them set straight, because for all you know, God's using you in that moment. And why waste that?
Exactly.
He's prompting you. And so instead of casting judgment, why don't you cast your arm around somebody and say, "Hey, what do you need? What can I help you with today? You know, is there anything that I can do that's within my power to help advance you in some way?" And sometimes it's just sitting down and sharing your story with somebody. I heard what you're going through. You want to hear what I've been going through, and share it with them. And gives perspective on
And
things.
I think it's really funny too because when we talk about the universal concept of recovery and how it applies into just about every facet of life that
Mhm.
we're in,
It does.
some of the best advice I've ever gotten from did not come from a recovery room.
Mhm.
Of all places, it came from premarital counseling, from a video called Love and Respect. And in that video, the pastor says, treat others as you would to God. In every situation, under every condition, with every single person you come in contact to, with unconditional love and unconditional respect. And when I started doing that, like, when you want to talk about level of commitment towards people, like how much am I going to commit to someone? When I started acting that out, treating others as I would to God. Now you listen to what your gut tells you. You don't put yourself at risk.
Right.
You know what I
Right,
mean? Those
right.
types of things. But when we talk about a level of commitment, like God calls us to be a faithful servant in all things.
Right.
You know, and lo and behold, 40 years later,
Mhm.
I find peace in my life, like practicing unconditional love and unconditional respect.
Well, and Sean, another trap that I found myself living in was, and this was with you and some other people in my life, was I'm willing to put in as much work as you are. I'll meet you halfway. When I see you trying, then I'll try.
Right.
Was kind of the not necessarily tit for tat, but
I think a lot of people think that way.
I shouldn't invest more of myself in you than you're willing to invest in yourself.
Right.
And that is a lie. That's deceitful. That's stinking thinking on my part. because when someone is hurting and struggling, the person who God has appointed in their life, in their pathway in that moment, has the obligation to go past the 50-50 mark, if that's what we want to call that,
Absolutely.
and do anything you can to help that person have a better day or a better outlook. And another thing too is, it's biblical. The Bible tells us, don't judge lest you be judged. So I don't know about, Better Days Rain Nation out there, but I don't want to be judged by my Lord and Savior the way that I've judged people in my past, because I'm going to come out on the wrong end of it.
Well, and I think that's where we all fall short. That's where
we fall
That's
short.
where we all miss the mark.
Right. That's exactly
Because,
right.
each and every one of us is full of self.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's on every level of life, social, government.
Yep.
Man loves to glorify himself.
Yep.
And we see that all the time.
And
That's why
sometimes-
we have big houses. That's why we
Right.
wear jewelry.
And sometimes
why-
glorification comes from not necessarily lifting myself up, but making someone else look worse.
Right. Stepping on people to make yourself look
And
good.
I think that's the worst kind of life you could have.
Yeah, it's hard to deal with today. I don't have a lot of respect for people that try to climb over other people.
Mm-mm.
But it's funny. Back in the day when I was a kid, I was a pothead when I was a kid, right? And I used to hate like drug dealers who sold hard drugs. Loved my weed dealer, but hated the cocaine dealer, hated the heroin dealer.
Right.
Every chance I saw him, I beat him up, and kick him out of the neighborhood and all that. Fast forward 10 years down the road, I became everything I hated.
Mhm.
Everything I hated in life, I
Right.
became that guy.
Right.
And then somehow, by trusting in God, I found peace
Mhm.
and found sobriety. I've got a good wife, I've got a good home life, and it's really funny when we talk about God's plan, because when I got into sobriety, or started my journey, I wanted to go to school to be an LCDC, right? So I'm working on a psychology degree, and I'm still in school for that, by the way. But my LCDC dreams are shot, pretty much shot, because the state of Texas has rules and regulations, that they go by. So that dream got shot. So then I tried to, get into peer support, and I did all their stuff. I did all the training, and then the state denied my application. And now I'm doing this, and it just goes to show you, when you hold the faith, you know what I mean? But all that led me up to this.
Right.
The education through college, the education through those trainings, and the 25 years lived experience that I have, and addiction, all that comes together and creates what Better Days Rain is today.
Right.
And that's why I'm here doing this, is because I want to create hope for hopeless people.
Right.
I was one of those hopeless people.
Right.
I remember when I chose to get sober, y'all, I didn't have shoes. When I went into sobriety, I went with a pair of sweatpants, no shirt, no shoes, hadn't showered in a week. I was at the bottom of the barrel.
Right.
And to think where all that has come with just somebody sparking a fire in me, and that's what it took.
Right.
It took one person to create that inspiration,
Mhm.
and I ran with it.
Right.
And it stuck with me. But it was like one person did it, and then another person did it, and then another person did it, and then another person did it. So it's like all these people that came together randomly, unaware they were working together,
Right.
showed me some unconditional
Man
love.
upstairs.
Yeah. With understanding God works through people, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And it just all fits. And
Right.
today, here we are at Warrior Garden Studios,
Yeah.
Very blessed to be a part of Warrior Garden Studios, by the way. Appreciate everything that they're doing for Better Days Rain, and looking forward to the future. I want to ask you one last thing before we wrap up.
Sure.
Do you think we would have ever came together and reconciled if both of us hadn't got into a recovery program?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because for me, as angry as I was at you, I'm just going to take my anger as an example. As angry as I was at you, that because of what you had done with your life, that anything that you would have had to say to me, regardless of how healed up you were, regardless of the recovery groups you had been in, that judgment would have been there attached to that anger. Because looking back, when I was judgmental, it was out of anger. That's where it came from. It was attached to anger. And I would have thought, yeah, he's doing this now, but just give him another few more months and he'll be back at it again. I wouldn't have given you the benefit of the doubt, so to speak. Now that I've shed my anger that I was carrying with me for so long, I'm able to receive what you have to offer me in my heart. And I know that it's real. And I know that based on what I just said, I just feel like under the premise that everyone needs some form of recovery. Okay? Because we've all been hurt somewhere in our past by somebody in some way that shaped who we are today and got us to where we're at today. In part, not much say in totality, but in part. And I would just encourage any family member out there that has a member of their family that is in a dark place to rethink how they're approaching it. Maybe back up instead of keeping the focus on the family member that's hurting, and look at themselves and introspectively and objectively, and just ask somebody else in the family, a third party, and say, do you see this in me? Have you experienced this when you're around me? And things like that, and get some people that'll give you some honest feedback about who you really are. And typically the type of person you're going to ask those questions to are some people that are in your tight circle,
Right.
that can be that honest with you.
Right.
And then take the information that they give you and go do something with it. Not all recovery groups look the same. Not all pathways to recovery are the same. So I would encourage anybody out there that has an addict in their family to go see about themselves first, just to check kick the tires and see if everything's good under the hood, so to speak. And you'd be surprised what you'll find. And then when you find these things that have contributed to who they are at that point and begin a recovery on that, then it helps them see this other person more clearly in a different light. It's a different set of eyes.
Yeah.
It's a different set of ears,
That's
and
it.
it's with a different heart.
Mhm.
And I think when that comes into play, then the relationship has the potential to heal. Right.
That's awesome, man. I am
So
so glad that you came on the show today. Like,
yeah,
it's
I've
one
enjoyed
thing to sit there and go hang out and have lunch, but it's a whole nother thing to have your dad on your show.
Well, hey, I'm just honored that you invited me to come out here and be a part of something that's happening right here in Amarillo, Texas. This is awesome, and it's going to help a lot of people, Sean.
And that's the goal. That's the goal of Better Days Ring. The goal is to create hope for hopeless people. We are a entity that wants to help the individual, the families of the still suffering, and ultimately create an understanding for community togetherness.
Mm-hmm.
Because individually, we're not going to beat this problem.
Right.
This is not going to be a problem that's going to be one in the rooms of recovery. It has to be one in the real world.
Right.
For it to apply.
Right.
And we spend so much time separating ourselves with healthy fears and division. It's that self-glorification that look at me,
Right.
appreciate me for the unique person that I am, that we have come to completely unappreciate each other for our differences.
Right.
And so that's what I love about this, is that we get to bring in all kinds of different people from different facets and forms of life.
Right.
And we come in here with the mutual understanding that we just want to help each other.
We help each other out.
And so, again, coming live from Warrior Garden Studios, my name is Sean Daniel, and we're out.